Good morning, Dad. Welcome back to the podcast. You're the co-host, so you better be here.
Yeah, I'm here.
I always hate when you watch the news and they have people in two different windows. It's like you're not important enough to be there. So glad you joined us. Today, we're going to be looking at the miracle of Jesus walking on the water, and then the often missed feature of him teleporting the boat to the shore after he walks on the water. And this also includes Peter attempting to walk on the water. So this story is going to happen right after the feeding of the 5,000. And it's a shame because it seems like the apostles totally missed the meaning behind that miracle and then lacked faith in Jesus's power over this windstorm. So we're going to be looking at Matthew, Mark, and John. So this brings us to our question today. When Jesus promises you'll reach the other side, do you trust him or do you let fear cloud your faith? And also, after seeing his power in your life, do you still doubt his ability to carry you through? And verse that I was thinking of when I was looking at this was Psalm 33:4. The word of the Lord is upright, and all his work is done in faithfulness. So the question is, when he says he'll take you to the other side, do you trust that? And that's kind of the anchor to this whole lesson today, this podcast. So this is episode 65 in the Jesus Said That series, looking at every word Jesus spoke in the New Testament. Today's episode is titled Jesus Walks on the Water and Teleports, from Matthew 14, Mark 6, and John 6.
Good to be with you and seen and not in a separate window. So that's a good thing. For those listening, I just want to relay the important fact. We're both white and mighty white. And I laugh about this because we had 11 baptisms, as you know, on Sunday. And we don't see color anymore. I was sitting down doing the baptismal certificates. And I'm looking, I'm going, oh, this is special because you have world representation there. We had some from Africa. We had some be baptized from Asia, actually from both the Philippines and India, Hispanic. The beauty also was to do your daughter, my granddaughter, Kimberly Joanna. And it was just special because as we're doing this, I'm going, wow, we knew that to be successful at the Colmer Manor Bible Church, our ministry with Pastor Kenny Jr., and I'm the senior pastor and also the senior in the name, just that we had to have a church that didn't look like us and to be successful. And God's been doing that. But it's funny because it's just like we really don't see color. And it's a good thing because we've been at this so long. And that's how it's meant to be. But we thank God for the opportunity today as we're reaching out to you. Wherever you're at, whatever you look like, we're thankful because we're under one blood, and the blood of Christ has brought us into the family of God.
People aren't aware, we're right outside of Washington, D.C. We're in PG County, and we're in the town of Colmer Manor, which is literally on the border of D.C. We're on the Maryland side. Very diverse area. So I really think your church should always reflect who's in your community. If you're out in West Virginia with a bunch of white people, your church will probably be all white.
Yes.
If you're in a diverse area, it should be diverse. And not because obviously we have quotas or anything, none of that. It's just you're reaching out to people and they get saved and then they join, and it should be a reflection of the area. So a lot of good things. It's been a busy time. A lot of good stuff happening. My daughter's birthday is actually today. So little Kimberly, she's a cutie. And I was up late last night because I was working and I was watching the LA riots. And then I'm about to go to bed and then I see that Israel bombs Iran. Right. It's like, you can't really just go to bed on that note. It's like, I got to see what's happening. So it was a late night, but it was interesting. A lot's happening in the world. A whole lot's happening. So anything with you want to share before we roll into this text?
No, I joked with the church a few weeks ago. I said, I'm not a prophet. I said, but let me tell you, I really think Israel is going to have to bomb Iran. I see everybody with their prophetic podcasts, like they knew prophetically. I said, now I just read what's going on. And it's just obviously it has to come. You can't have somebody whose sole desire is to blow you out of existence to remain, and God will continue to bless Israel. And just we do pray for the peace of Israel and for the Iranians too, because they just have poor leadership.
Yeah,
So
if you have bad leaders,
souls.
you feel bad for the people.
Exactly.
Because you can't do anything if your leaders are crazy. So hopefully that'll get resolved quickly. Yeah. Too many wars going on, but pray that ends quickly. So today's podcast is going to focus, as I said, on Jesus walking on the water. So just quick context. Sum this up, podcast 64 and 63, both of those together. We see that John the Baptist is killed. Jesus gets word of that. He tries to get away with his apostles. They meet over 5,000 men. He has compassion and he feeds them. Jesus does that. And then this story is going to take place right after that. So the crowds will be amazed by the feeding. They too will misunderstand it. And it says in John, they're going to try to take Jesus by force and make him king. So they totally see him as a political messiah and don't understand his mission, which is somewhat understandable, but at the same time, they should have been listening to his teaching more than the feeding. So Jesus will reject their agenda and send his disciples across the Sea of Galilee, promising they will reach the other side. And we're going to see that Jesus is divine and has attributes that are only attributed to God, which we see in Psalm 77:19, which says, "Your way was through the sea, your path through the great waters, yet your footprints were unseen." And this is pointing to both the Father and obviously in this context, Jesus. And he's Lord over creation. So we're going to start with Mark's account as the disciples set out across the sea. And I find this very humorous because obviously the scripture is inspired. I think it's correct. And this is written by John Mark, who is Peter's friend. And we believe Peter dictated it. But this account leaves out Peter's lack of faith in falling into the water. So it would kind of be like if you failed and I write the book, I might say, I'll leave that part out. So I just found a little humor here.
It's sort of like the Chronicles versus the Kings. The King seems to depict everything that happens, good and bad. The Chronicles more in the history of the Southern Kingdom. Some things just don't quite make it in there.
Don't make the cut. They might say they already know about it, so let's move on. But I always think that's kind of funny. You see that in the book of Mark. They leave out quite a few things about Peter. And I guess if Peter's dictating, Mark might be like, oh, we'll leave that part out. So here we are. If you're joining us in your Bible, we are in Mark chapter 6, verse 45, and we'll be going through 52. So it says, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowds. So this is showing urgency. Made means to compel. So basically he told the apostles, you are getting in the boat and you are crossing to the other side. And I think in his kindness, he's kind of getting them away from that crowd. Because to a bunch of young apostles, your rabbi being made king would probably be pretty appealing. And yet he says, get it out of here.
Especially when you've been debating on who's going to be the greatest. Yeah. And it's like, this is our opportunity.
Yeah. And we look at Deuteronomy 31:8, and the Lord says, the Lord is the one who will go before you. He will be with you. And this is actually a Moses speaking to Joshua from Deuteronomy 31:8. The Lord is the one who will go before you. He will be with you, and he will not leave you or abandon you. Do not be afraid or discouraged. How often do we read Old Testament passages and then not see the timeless truths and apply them to our lives? And I think that was the apostles' problem here. So this brought me to a very big issue, which I had never noticed before. And the big issue is the feeding of the 5,000. Okay, if you let me just back up. If you are someone who deals with biblical errors, this is one I hadn't run into, but I'm surprised more people don't use it. Obviously, I don't believe there's any errors in the Bible, but I wanted to share this because I probably spent like quite a few hours trying to figure this one out. So the feeding of the 5,000 occurred in a deserted place near Bethsaida. creating a contradiction. Why? Well, Jesus and his disciples were near Bethsaida. Remember, they went into the countryside, but it says they were near the city. And that's when, Jesus says, go find bread, all that stuff, then feeds the 5,000. Yet in Mark's gospel, Jesus instructs his disciples to cross the Sea of Galilee to reach Bethsaida. So that kind of was messing with my head, because how can you sail to a location that you're already right next to? Like, if I am in a town and I just walk into the countryside, I'm not going to walk through the town to get on a boat just to step off the boat to come right back to where I was. So what's going on here? And in John's gospel, it says they sailed across from Bethsaida towards the towns of Capernaum and Gennesaret, which are neighboring towns on the opposite of Bethsaida. And Mark even says that they arrive at Gennesaret. So the question is, how can these make sense? I like some commentators just say Mark was confused. He didn't know the geography. Obviously, those who don't believe in inspiration or errors and in Scripture, or believe there are errors. So when I really dug into this, we have to look at the word to in Mark's passage. Jesus says, go ahead of him to the other side. And here's the big word, this one, to Bethsaida. Now, I did a word study on this, sought people's counsel. And the word to is also translated 23 times in the New Testament as against or other side of. All right. So this interpretation to me makes much more sense, because Jesus is saying, go ahead of him to the other side, against, or in modern terms, opposite of Bethsaida. And if they went against or the opposite side, they would sail to the region of Capernaum and Gennesaret, which is exactly what they did. So I think it's one of those translation things you could use too, but many times in the New Testament, against or other side of is also used. So I think that would just totally clear up the passage if that is used.
I loved when I read your notes, because when I turned 60 about 3.5 years ago, I said, okay, for 10 years, one of my goals will be to nail down my Greek grammar and work on these things. So when I see something like this, it piques my curiosity, because nobody has time to probe everything. And you come upon these things, you go, I got to look at it. So you're exactly right. When you see the preposition pros and the possibility of translation here, that was good. But it was interesting also, because we both know the scripture is inspired, no errors here. When you look at old maps, they have Julius of Bethsaida, which is to the east, and then you have Galilee of Bethsaida toward the west. So in other words, some people think that there was like one connected landmass or that way, or there are two separate towns, because there could be a little competition. If you have a town named House of Fish and you want to attract people, you might want to have the same name. Come over here. Here's the House of Fish. Here's the House of Fish. So I think you have at least two viable alternatives. What you've given with the preposition makes total sense, but also older commentaries and some newer ones also show the possibility of there being two Bethsaidas, which would also show, because they have the same thing with Jericho in the New Testament versus the Old Testament one. Jericho. So either way, we know it's inspired, but I just loved when you brought that out, because it's like, oh, wow, I got to jump on this one. And so I learned some things from you, so thank you. But this good. But it shows two possibilities, but Scripture is accurate. There are no mistakes. Sometimes we don't have all the details to answer everything, but it makes so much sense with the 23 times being translated that way, that they were obviously going in that direction.
And I think that's why it's important to have pastors and people who have time to study this. And that's why I love doing chronological studies, because you compare them all, and it's like, wait a second. Because I was looking at quite a few commentaries, because I usually do that at the end, or if I'm stuck. I try not to use them too much. And I just noticed that a lot of people just said, yeah, you went to the other side to Bethsaida. And they totally, I don't know, didn't catch it, or didn't want to deal with it. Because, a lot of commentaries, you get to a tricky question, they just skip it. So I don't know. But when I really put the time in, that just seemed to make the most logical sense. That would be biblical. Also, for those of you listening today, I was joking with Dad that sometimes when we're doing our podcast, I grunt like a caveman. So we're trying when the other is speaking not to say, huh, yeah. So if you think we're a little more quiet than normal, that's why, because we want you to be able to hear without me sounding like Fred Flintstone over here. So we're trying to learn. There's all words we all work on and habits we try to fix. So one of mine is always saying the word so, because I always connect that way. Here we go. After he had taken leave of them, Jesus, he went up on the mountain to pray. So Jesus goes up on the mountain on a hill near Bethsaida, and he follows his pattern of seeking the Lord's will, the Father. And Hebrews 7:25 says Jesus always lives to make intercession for us. And it shows how he's prayerful, even for his followers. So I also see in this passage that a worldly man would be overjoyed that a massive crowd wants to make him king. Yet Jesus goes to his Father in prayer, understanding his purpose, and also protects his young team by sending them away. So there's a lot going on here, a lot of dynamics that are just kind of touched on.
I think I mentioned earlier, but Mark, I think, does this strategically too, showing the consistency of Jesus's prayer. Chapter 1, we find him praying before the day. Here in chapter 6, sort of in the middle of the book, and then in the Garden of Gethsemane in chapter 14. But the encouragement is when you have Jesus watching over his disciples, because obviously he's sending them out for this trial. He compels them. Like you said, he really forced them into the boat. But now he's praying for them, and he sees them, we're told. And it's encouraging to us as we come into these opportunities of interference. In other words, we hit something because we're bringing out the gospel, just knowing that he's postured praying for us at that moment.
And he said they're going to the other side.
That's right.
So they should have just trusted that. When evening came, we know from the previous text it was already pretty late, but this shows that even more time has passed. The boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. So the Sea of Galilee is about 680 feet below sea level, give or take, and is surrounded by hills that really amplify the winds. They just come rushing down. And it can create waves over 7 feet high within a couple minutes. That's big waves, especially for a fishing boat. So this is can become a very dangerous situation quickly. So we see that the disciples are halfway across, and they're not in the middle, literally, of the sea. If you look at the map from Bethsaida to Gennesaret or whatever, it's kind of near the upper echelons on the east and west. So they're going, but they're in a bad situation, and they're about 4 miles out in the darkness.
They're far enough from land to panic.
Yeah. So here comes this giant windstorm, and the danger of wind is it can capsize your boat. Makes waves, pushes your boat, it's over. So Jesus alone on land sees, because he's all-knowing. And I was thinking of Psalm 139:2. You know where I sit, and when I rise up, you discern my thoughts from afar. And it says he saw them straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Very early in the morning, he came towards them walking on the sea and intended to pass them by. So this word for straining can mean tortured. They were tortured rowing. Kind of gives you a funny picture. And it shows their exhaustion in fighting against the winds. And I just kind of picture these apostles, probably young men, very strong. They're working, and they're starting to panic because they've been in there for many hours now. They're rowing, and the wind is just not letting up. And this Jesus will now walk on the water, in above itself is incredible. Job 9:8 says, he alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. Now, I've heard much to do about he passes them by. And why was Jesus going to pass them by? And I think there's two possible reasons that make very good sense to me. The first and most probable, at least my estimation, is that Jesus said he would meet them on the other side. So he was simply walking across the water to meet them on the other side. I always feel like Jesus just has this faith that if he tells them something, he's like, why don't you guys just believe it? So he said, I'm going to meet you on the other side. So he's just going to walk by them and meet them on the other side. The other perspective, which is possible, is a more spiritualized one, but it goes back, which many of these passages do, to Moses. And when God the Father revealed his glory to Moses in Exodus 33. And this passage seems to have some parallels possibly to that. What happens? Well, I'll go ahead and read this. And this is when the Lord whose name I am, will reveal himself to Moses. The text says, then Moses said, please let me see your glory. He, the Father, said, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But he added, you cannot see my face, for humans cannot see me and live. The Lord said, here's a place near me. You are to stand on the rock, and when my glory passes by, I will put you in the crevice of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. So it's kind of this picture of just deity passing by.
One of the reasons people have picked up on this traditionally as well is because of the single term in the Greek, pass by. Exodus 33:22, it comes up twice from the Greek translation. And the other one that's rather interesting is in 1 Kings chapter 19 and verse 11, when Elijah is depressed and God wants to show him his glory, he passes by a theophany as well. So either works in here, but that's why people have picked this up, saying possibly this is a theophany because this is the same term Mark uses, and none of the other Gospels use it, but Mark does, that connects with the Exodus and 1 Kings passage.
Maybe it's both.
Yeah.
It
could be. Yeah, and sometimes we get there. Yes.
He's passing by because he's going to the other side, and he's also revealing his glory. And that's why Jesus tells Philip in John 14:9, the one who has seen me has seen the Father. And I want to draw this in because we're going to see this. They're going to say, who is it? And he's even going to use the same phrase that that God uses with Moses. Who are you? And I am. And we're going to see that too. So maybe some parallels going on. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. That would be kind of crazy thing to see.
That's right.
Immediately he spoke to them and said, take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. So here they think they see a phantom and they scream and they don't even assume that it could be Jesus, which I think kind of is disrespect to him after all they had literally just witnessed a couple hours before. So I know it's dark, waves are crashing, and they see someone walking across the water and they panic. And it reminds me of Isaiah 43:1, fear not, for I have redeemed you and have called you by name. You are mine. And Jesus's words, it is I, really is a reflection of God's name in Exodus 3:14. I am who I am, which is a sign of deity. And a question here that I really want people to think about, does fear make you see a ghost instead of your Savior? Because I think a lot of people have fears that are just foolish when we should be focused on Christ. Then he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. They were completely astonished because they had not understood about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. So we see the wind just stops. And once again, just going back to the Psalms, Psalm 107:29, he made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed, speaking of God. And then we see once again the deity of Jesus. Now, they have hardened hearts because they weren't able to connect what they had seen from the feeding of the 5,000. And I think that's what Christians a lot of times struggle with. So Mark 8:17 through 18 records Jesus asking, "Do you not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened?" So they get chastised there.
It's a theme in Mark, sadly, that their hearts are hard, and it's repeated, this statement, and obvious that kept them from seeing the Messiah and then projecting something that really wasn't there upon the situation, which I think often we do if we're not looking for the Lord in the midst of the storm, then we're going to probably see something we shouldn't see.
And when we go through these passages like this, I always try to save some information for each one. And I have some interesting questions coming up in Matthew's account. So this is Matthew 14. So I'll go ahead and turn there. Got my normal Bible back.
And as you're turning there, I'll just toss out as well. You got really two kinds of storms in life. One is a storm of correction. That's with Jonah. Jonah was doing what was wrong. God says, okay, let me hurl a storm at you. And then you have a storm of perfection. I think that's what you have here because he had just taught the disciples. He had let them participate in the feeding of 5,000. So it's not correction so much as perfection. He wants to mature them.
And such a picture of free will. People can watch and make decisions based on the information they receive. And it depends on them if it's a right decision or wrong. Jonah, he clearly made the wrong decision. Yes. And God said, well, I have other plans for you, so you can fight me. Where it seems like the apostles, they just constantly get chastised. And Matthew 14, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. So this really repeats Mark's account. And Jesus is focused, I really think, on three objectives. First is getting the disciples out of a situation in which the crowd wants to make him king. And we'll see that from John's account in a little bit. The second is to go ahead of him, which implies he will meet them on the other side. And the final is that he wants to be alone and pray. So those are the three reasons why he does this. And you have to look at the apostles' position. They're weary. They had just gone throughout all Galilee, preaching, teaching, healing, all of that. They return to go on a vacation. They hear that John is killed. Then when they're trying to get away from everyone, they meet 5,000 people. And then they are the ones who distribute the bread and fish that Jesus multiplies. And then they get into a boat and they're going to be rowing all night. So these guys are tired. They're probably pretty cranky at this point. So after dismissing the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone. So once again, he's God incarnate, but he's showing dependence on the Father, setting an example for us.
I love that he's communion with the Father, but also, again, the picture, he's praying for us during whatever is going on in our life. And if we could only have that image of him ever living to make intercession for us, life would be much better. It'd be a constant source of encouragement.
And Jerome observed, he went up to pray alone, teaching us to seek solitude for communion with God. So it's Jesus wanted to get away to pray, and the 5,000 kind of stopped him from that, but he still got a way to pray. He still made it happen, even though it was inconvenient. But the boat was already over a mile from land. I like Matthew's account because he's, tax collector. He's not the sailor. And where John is going to give much more detail, being the sailor that he was, battered by the waves because the wind was against them. So it's battered, giant waves, darkness, tiredness. And around 3 a.m, he came towards them walking on the sea. So this is the fourth watch, 3 through 6. Jesus approaches, and Psalm 89:9 says, "You rule the raging of the sea. When its waves rise, you still them." And I give these Old Testament verses because I think it's good when people try to say Jesus isn't God. Just to say, look at all these verses that are applied to God that you can then apply to Jesus too.
It's a wonderful thing. You get the image of him praying for you, but he's also revealing himself to you during the storm. We can't miss that. He's trying to show these apostles who are freaking out at this point, right? I'm God. Here I am. I'm walking on the water. Take a look and remember who I am. And they miss that. So he wants, I really believe, even as we're going through stormy times, we have to be looking for him because he wants to show himself to you during those times.
Definitely. So when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they cried out. Now, here's a couple facts that when I just had time to think about it, made my mind kind of, I don't want to say wander, but tried to get into their shoes. These are seasoned fishermen, some of them, and they had been in windstorms before, so they genuinely feel threatened by the wind. So it wasn't like, some newbie like Matthew getting on the sea. Maybe he was a sailor, I don't know, but we know that he was a tax collector. But these are some seasoned pros out there who had lived on the water, and they feel threatened. And a second observation is they believe Jesus is a ghost. And I don't know what we can draw from this, but these are the same guys who had just cast out demons, had lots of spiritual encounters. So for some reason, they assume that Jesus is a spirit. This is where their hard heart comes in, because they'd seen all these miracles, and yet they didn't guess that this force could be Jesus. They just assumed it was a spirit.
I won't grunt, but I'll offer you a poll. 2,000 participants. Do you believe in ghosts? No, 57%. Yes, 40%. Unsure, 3%. One thing's for sure, 100% of the apostles believe that day in ghosts.
And they're petrified.
They are that.
So notice that Jesus doesn't toy with his apostles. It's not like when we see media and he's silent and they're all panicking. It says, immediately Jesus spoke to them. Have courage, it is I, don't be afraid. So it's not drawn out, it's not dramatic. He sees that they're struggling and he just speaks to them and identifies who he is.
Very special term he uses 7 out of the 8 New Testament times by Jesus. Be of good cheer, have courage. I always think of the John 16:33. These things I've spoken to you, that in me you might have peace. In the world you shall have tribulation, but here's your expression, be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world.
And they should have been a good cheer. Yeah. But we're going to see how Peter now reacts to this, because Matthew doesn't mind throwing him under the bus.
Running away. Yeah.
So he says, don't be afraid. And Lord, now notice this quote, if it's you, Peter answered him, command me to come to you on the water. So the if it's you is interesting because it shows he has little faith. He has some faith because he's willing to get out of the boat in the middle of a storm, which is brave. But yet at the same time, he's kind of like, if it's you. So you can tell he's already doubting right here. Come, he says, and climbing out of the boat, Peter started walking on the water towards him. So Jesus has power, obviously, over nature. So Peter's feet are touching the water, yet somehow the water is solid to him. And he's probably having a huge adrenaline high at that moment. And this shows that Christ's words enable the impossible. And as we see, if you have faith like a grain of a mustard seed, nothing will be impossible for you. Augustine wrote, Paul walked on the water by the words of Christ, showing that faith in his command can sustain us in all things. Now, notice what happens. He saw the strength of the wind and he was afraid. So he was afraid before this. It's not like this is some new phenomena, and was beginning to sink and cried out, Lord, save me. And I know we're going to comment on that in a minute, but Peter's focus shift from Jesus's promise, just like earlier, I'll meet you on the other side. If you trust me, walk to me. And how many sermons, it becomes so cliche, but when you take your eyes off Christ, his promises, then fear can take over. Now, I know we were talking about this the other day, how the word saved is used in the Bible. I think it's very interesting because when you read the New Testament, this might seem shocking to people, but it doesn't really give the gospel a lot. because I think the gospel is so simple that if you, confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And you look at how many verses are just directly on salvation itself, being saved from hell. There's not like a plethora of like hundreds and hundreds of verses as we would think. There's really just a couple key passages, because I think it's such a simple thing to become a Christian that the Bible just doesn't spend so much time. It gives you the history, tells you how, and it doesn't really dwell on that. Now, why are we saying this? And I can let you speak, but in this, we were talking about how people take the term saved so much out of context. How people will, every time they see the word saved in the New Testament, they will try to apply that to salvation. Where, for instance, in the book of James, we see it will save you from a bad judgment. We see most of the time in Scripture when the word saved is used, it's talking about a physical deliverance, not even a spiritual deliverance, but a physical deliverance. And I can let you chime in just how people tend to abuse some words to fit their theology or just bad ideas from the Bible.
The other day, I had the privilege, I took you out for lunch. We don't get to do this often. It's every so many months we get a chance. And I said, let me just take you out. We need a little time away. Talk about
chicken
a few
and
things.
Waffles.
And we were talking about this word here. And right then in the restaurant, I noticed a former state senator from Maryland had come in, someone who was not pleased with my position on traditional marriage. And I thought, well, here you go. That man needs to be saved in the sense of how the term save is used 68% of the time in the New Testament, because obviously with his stance on that issue, probably doesn't know the Lord. But then it just means to rescue or deliver. And that's the other 32% that we find as it is used here. But I had to chuckle when I saw the individual. I thought, there's my object lesson at that time. By the way, we had a great lunch together.
We did.
That was a lot of fun. But exactly, you have to take a look at each context. It just means to rescue or to deliver and to see if it's used in the context of salvation or not.
And Jesus a lot of times uses it in the context of rewards. We see apostles, they use it a lot of times, it'll save you from a bad judgment. Not speaking of salvation proper, but speaking that you are saved from Christ looking at you and saying, you kind of failed on earth. You're obviously coming into heaven because you're saved, but your works pass through the fire and they don't make it.
And that's a great observation right there. And people need to look at the context too. You got it.
Just kind of a side thing, but
yeah, that's a good point.
People try to redefine words, and not to beat a dead horse, we see sovereign. People redefine the word sovereign to mean that God controls every molecule, where he has the power to if he wishes because he's God, but it just means he's king. He's sovereign. We even see, words like election, or people tend to read in, as soon as they hear election, all this other stuff that really isn't in the text. It's philosophy. So we have to be very careful on our definitions and the context, because could you imagine if we tried to say verse 30, Peter saying, Lord, save my soul? It wouldn't make any sense. So we have to be very careful. And we come to verse 31. Once again, notice the lack of drama. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and took hold of him. I always love the movies. Peter's like drowning and he's falling and the hand has to come through the water. And it's like, he's gasping. And he just reaches out and grabs him and looks at him and says, you of little faith, why did you doubt? So it's a gentle rebuke, because he does say he has faith. It's just little. He doesn't have much. And Jesus questions, why did you doubt? And he had seen all that Jesus had done. Then they got into the boat and the wind ceased. And once again, this is Jesus's deity. Now, Matthew's going to add, then those in the boat worshiped him and said, truly you are the Son of God. This is why he's deity. He's not less than God. He's not a little g God. He is God. And reminds me of Daniel 7:13-14, when the Son of Man receives worship. So the apostles are tired. They fall on their knees before God, Jesus, and understand he's God. So he has power over everything. Anything you want to add before we look at our final passage and wrap this up from John's perspective?
No. Appreciate all your observations. They're very good.
So John, I love the book of John. Last gospel written. And I couldn't prove it, but I would say he probably looked at all the other gospels and said, they have all those stories. Let's add different details that were past. And he's going to talk about Jesus teleporting, which we see a couple people teleport in Scripture. Philip, I can think of, Elijah, and then Jesus here. But what's so cool with him is it's with his whole boat of apostles. So it's his mastery over something we don't think time and space. Usually we think more matter, but how he can just move from one location to another. So in John 6, 14 through 21, let me go ahead and turn there myself so that I have my notes. All right. Don't want to be like those sermons when the pastor takes forever to turn there and everyone gets bored as all get out. Oh, that's going to be a fun one, just seeing that when we come to John 8 and 753, where people all say that's not in the earliest manuscripts. That's another topic for another day. By the grace of
God, we'll say by straight on that it's Bible.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so interesting. People always say it's not Scripture, but yet the earliest church fathers quote it. And then it's like, well, the manuscripts we have that come later than the church fathers say that it wasn't original, but yet the very people right after the apostles are quoting it. So it's that's a pretty bad argument. So here we come to John 6. And it says, when the people saw the sign, a key word in John, as many of you know, he had done, they said, this truly is the prophet who is to come into the world. Now, Jesus is the prophet, but I don't think they understood. If you remember back to Deuteronomy 18, there was this sign that Moses said that there will be another who will come like me, who will be a prophet. And it shows they missed, though, who Jesus was, that he wasn't just like Moses, who fed them manna in the wilderness by God the Father's power, but Jesus was much greater than Moses. So the people viewed Jesus as another Moses who was feeding them in the wilderness, but this did not match up with the Father's will. Therefore, when Jesus realized that they were about to come and make him by force, were coming to take him by force and make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Kind of reminds me of Saul when they wanted to make him king and he was hiding. And in a sense here, Jesus, who's much better than Saul, said, nope, not doing it. So Jesus retreats and protects his mission. And John 18:36, he will later declare, my kingdom is not of this world. It wasn't at this time in the physical sense. And then he prays, aligning himself with the Father's will. So when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. So Capernaum is a key base on the northwest shore, it's believed, and it was their goal to get there. However, it looks like they kind of went a little bit, just a tiny bit off course to Gennesaret. So they're neighboring towns. So who knows, maybe they even shared a port, but we will look that up another time. And the sea became rough and became a strong wind because a strong wind was blowing. Often people picture this as this huge rainstorm. It seems like this is just a windstorm, which is still very deadly. But here's this huge windstorm going on. And when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were afraid. So rowing 3 to 4 miles would be very difficult. Don't underestimate how tiring that would be. And they're tired, they're cold, they're probably scared, and now all of a sudden they see someone walking on the water.
Let me just pitch out 3 eyes quickly. If you're looking at John's account, you have intercession. Jesus is praying for him. You have interference expected if you're doing the work of the Lord. The storm's going to come, but then intervention. It's sort of like the Psalms often. It's just how it works that way too. David pours out his complaint, And, he's praying, and then he talks about his opposition, and somehow then this is how the Lord delivered me. It's the nature of God.
But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." All right. So we see that he walks on the water. He speaks to them and says, "Don't be afraid." So Augustine writes, "He who created the sea walks upon it and says, 'It is I,' to show that he is master of all creation." Then they were willing to take him on board. And obviously all the stuff with Peter happens in the meantime. Once again, John, I think he kind of already saw that, happen in the other gospel, so it kind of skips over that. So they were willing to take him on board. And once the boat was at the land where they were heading. And this is really the miracle. The boat instantly arrives at their location. So it teleports, and that's 3 to 4 miles, just all of a sudden, boom. So look at that once again. At once, the boat was at the land where they were heading. So the apostles are shocked, battling waves. They experience somebody walking on water, and then Peter tries to walk on water. Then he is picked up by Jesus. Then Jesus gets in the boat, and all of a sudden they're on the wind stops, and then all of a sudden they're on the shore.
Amazing.
It would have been very trippy. So the boat was instantly at the land. And once again, that's Jesus' power over time, space, and matter. 3 things you have to have. And he's Lord over all those things. Anything you want to say before I get to timeless truths?
No, let's go for it.
All right. Yeah, because this was a big passage. Timeless truths. Just 3 of them. Jesus' promises are sure. Jesus commanded to go to the other side, and this guaranteed the apostles' arrival, yet they were blinded by fear. So we need to remember the words of Moses, "God is not man, that he should lie." All right, and that's obviously speaking of the Father. Incarnation wasn't understood at that time, but God is not going to lie. So that's from Numbers 23. Jesus' deity overpowers doubt. Walking on the water and calming the storm proclaims Jesus as God, fulfilling Job 9:8. His power is shown in feeding the 5,000, and that should really anchor our faith in his ability. And then faith grows through trust. Peter's walk and the boat's arrival shows that trusting Jesus' word enables miracles. Doubt, like the disciples, harden hearts and hinders faith. So God is a miracle worker. That's why we go always in prayer. We ask him to do the impossible, and we have faith because he has the ability to change situations. And then we come just to our very simple application. Trust Jesus' promises. When Jesus says you'll reach the other side, believe him. And this is when we need to reflect on his past faithfulness, like the feeding of the 5,000, and trust his word. 2 Corinthians 1:20 says, all the promises of God find their yes in him. So if he gives a promise, it's going to come true. This is to recognize his power. The disciples missed Jesus' deity after the feeding miracle, and they were unprepared. Psalm 77:11 says, I will remember the deeds of the Lord. So we need to ask ourselves, what things have we seen that Christ has done for us? And how can we keep from forgetting those things? And finally, 3, step out in faith. Like Peter, obey Jesus' call to come, trusting his power over your fears. We need to pray for boldness to act on his word. Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith, it is impossible to please him. So the question is, what steps of faith are you taking today? Any closing thoughts before I read the closing thought?
It's a lesson that needs to be learned, and hopefully we get it the first time. In Mark 4:35, he says, we're going to the other side. They had a storm, kind of the same situation, and they didn't get it. And I just point out, you got to understand, he's praying for you. Keep looking for him, and he'll deliver you at the right time. But just learn your lesson, because you don't want to be like Jonah and have to take the horrific experience in the sea to be rescued by the big fish, and then God turns around and says exactly the same commands to him that he said previously. So try to get it right the first time. You'll be glad you did.
Yeah, definitely. And our closing thought here, Jesus is walking on the water and teleporting the boat proclaims him as the Son of God, fulfilling his promise to bring the disciples to the other side. Despite witnessing the feeding of the 5,000, they doubted, letting fear overshadow his power. When Jesus promises you'll make it through, will you trust him, recalling his past miracles? You know, we live in a world of doubt and fear, so it's time we really trust Jesus and worship him as the Son of God. And that was podcast 65 in the Jesus Said That series, looking at every word Jesus spoke in the New Testament. And this is Jesus Walks on the Water and Teleports from Matthew 14, Mark 6, and John 6. Long passage, but a good one.
Absolutely.
So, what would you like to share with us that people might find interesting other than drinking tomato juice?
Appreciate that. The other day, I'd been praying about two pastors that reached out to me that they wanted books, both from Kenya, separate locations in Kenya. And one was for their people. The other was for pastors and then also for prisoners because there was going to be a jail outreach. And just been praying about getting this project done. Is this what the Lord wants me to do? You know, it's like we really want God's direction, we act. And the Ken J. Burge Senior Foundation, let me just give the shameless promo. You just look it up on Ken J. Burge SR Foundation.com. You can see the projects we do.
And we make a lot of money off this.
That's why we do it.
It's the foundation where 0% goes to us.
Yes.
It all goes out.
Thank you.
Just to clear, because people have foundations and it's like, we take 85%. And it's like, we don't take anything.
Exactly. So. Thank you. So that morning, before I was leaning towards getting the project going, someone had written to me on Facebook, a lady, and she wrote an MOG, which stands for Man of God. She said, pray for me. My husband just left me and I'm pregnant, a Christian gal. And where does she live? In Kenya. And I just got thinking, you know, Lord, if we have more pastors and we're reaching the prisoners and the people are getting truth, maybe we can prevent some of these future situations. So that day I authorized 250 books to go out for the various projects. And the gal seemed somewhat like she was hinting at suicide, gave her a word of encouragement. She wasn't asking for anything. She just really needed a word of encouragement. Sure that she seems to be doing fine, but those 250 books are going out. But I'm amazed how God will confirm oftentimes when we're just trying to do discipleship and help people out, that you can get two contacts, same country, but then a third person, same country, all unrelated to each other, to show you this is what he wants you to do. And that's the nature of our God. He wants to get it done.
Yeah, just a lot of good stuff going on. Just designed the book cover for Attributes of God on Fire.
And it's beautiful.
So I know this is early, but when does that come out approximately?
That I was actually given a date the other day at my production meeting, February the 3rd. Okay. So we have the Devotions Year 1, 365-day journey with practical applications.
Upgraded.
Exactly. That comes out November the 4th, and then the attributes will follow February 3rd, 2026. And the covers have the symmetry now because my publisher says they really like what we offer them. And so here you're doing these covers, and you've done now the devotion book, you did the Ephesians, and then the attributes, and my preaching book is truly on its heels. So I appreciate your ability. It's so special. But thank you. I'm very excited about these projects.
The old cover, which they asked me to design for the first edition, that was ugly. And I can say that because I did it. Where I'm really happy with how this one turned out. I think people are gonna find it appealing, and you kind of want something on a bookshelf that looks interesting.
That would grab your attention.
That's kind of what I was going for, and trying to, with the designs, all your books now, I'm trying to tie in the same color schemes, all that. So, and
you created a motto that appears now on each of the books. So when you look on the series, even if you saw them on a shelf, you'd say, "Oh, that's from the series."
So we're trying to make one I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but similarities between each of them with the design. So things here have been good. I know we're gearing up for vacation. When this airs, we'll probably be back. And we're all going to Pennsylvania, so we're looking forward to that.
Very much so.
I'll share a fun story. It's not spiritual at all, but just with life. The Switch 2, a video game system, for those who don't know, was coming out. And my kids enjoy playing with me. They're 6, 5, 3. The 1-year-old really doesn't care. He just tries to knock everything over. But Kenneth, who's 3, he gets the controller and really thinks he's doing something. And I wanted to get the new Switch 2. So it's something family we do together. But they're hard to get your hands on. So I saved up money, was all happy. And then about a month ago, my wife told me, I hate to tell you this, but that money you saved up went to the mortgage. Oh, that stinks. But then, so I started saving again. And actually, someone gave me a gift, money just for the exact amount, which was kind of cool. Mm-hmm. So I was like, okay, I'll get this. But I was just trying to think, well, it'd be a fun experience for the kids because you kind of always think back on your childhood about those fun times, crazy times, but nothing dangerous, obviously. So I was like, why don't we go stand in line and go get the Switch? So the night before, I told my wife the idea. She said, you're crazy, but go for it. The 2 girls would love to go stand in line with you. So we called the one Target. And it was 8 p.m. at night. It was being released the next day. And I said, my wife said, when should my husband get there with, my children to stand in line? Because what they do is they release 25 and they give you a ticket. So the one person, this was Crofton, which is by us. And they said, there's already people outside.
Correct.
8 p.m. the night before. So I was like, oh, no. So I told the girls, because I did what I shouldn't have done, and I told them early. Never tell kids anything early because they won't let you forget it. So I said, I'll tell you what, we'll wake up early tomorrow, and we'll just go to the one in Bowie. So we got up at 4 a.m., and girls were so excited to them. That was the biggest thing ever. So we go, and there was no one there. So we stood outside the Target, and from 4 to 7, and by 7, there was maybe 60, 70 people there.
And just to interject, I got up at 5 a.m. to go have my devotion, and I'm going, a message from Getty, and it's you and the girls in front of Target. I'm going, that's 4 a.m.
So I go, and the Target handled it beautifully, the release, which kudos to them. But we get our ticket, so we go in, and I swiped a credit card, and there's this line. It's really grown, and it says denied. It's like, oh no, I know I have. So I pulled out my other credit card and swiped and said denied. And then I really start panicking because you're in the front of this line, and all these people are super hyped, and it's like denied. It's like, I have the money. So then I swiped another card, and then it said denied, and it was so embarrassing. So that moment, my wife was at home, and she's getting all the fraud reports. That they think someone has stolen my credit card. So she acted quickly and said it wasn't fraud. So I said, I got to try this one more time because I'm holding up the line. I've been there since 4. You
didn't want to be a Switch martyr.
So I did it. And then thankfully my wife had cleared because it was sent to her phone. And but I was sweating with that. But the girls had fun. And now we've been playing Mario Kart and little games like that, having fun.
Okay.
So. Different from our spiritual side, I know, but just life is exciting. So looks like we hit the hour mark, so I better stop talking, and we'll see everyone next time.